Good afternoon. Welcome to TIGCR's prestigious scholar talk. Today it's our great honor to have Professor Federico Gregorio. Did I pronounce the name correctly? Okay. With us. Okay. Professor Gregorio received his PhD in University of Georgia. Okay, if I'm incorrect, just correct. Okay. He's now associate professor at the Department of Marketing at University of Akron, and his research interest in product placement, creativity, and online consumer reviews, digital marketing. And he has published extensively in many prestigious journals on advertisement and marketing. But if you are wondering why TIGCR invited a professor specialized in marketing to do the talk, let me tell you, today's topic is extremely interesting. The title of the talk is When Brands Take a Stand, the Impact of Political Ideology on Consumer Response to Brands' Explicit Social Positions. I think this is a very new and very interesting topic. We were just chatting about in political science. We already talked a lot about how political ideology affects people's making friends, choosing information channels, those kinds of things. But I think it is a very new topic for us to start thinking about the linkage between ideology and consumers' response to the brands. Okay, so I believe we can learn a lot from Professor Gregorio. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'm not going to use this. I'm going to try not to use this. I don't like to hold that. So, all right, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to present. It's a very nice day outside. It's 2 o'clock. You probably should be taking a nap if you're not in class. So, and it's a beautiful day. So I appreciate you coming here. So I'll try to make it at least a little bit interesting. So they always say that you should start your presentations with a story or something. I don't have any stories about this, but I'll give you some examples. So there's a company called Goya Foods. So Goya Foods, they sell all kinds of Latin foods in America, right? Different kinds of, and it's a very big company. It's not world famous, but it's famous in the US. Great. So this year, the CEO of Goya Foods just announced that Donald Trump is the legal president of the United States, and he should be still president, and it is terrible that Joe Biden stole that from him. And he said this not during the election. He said this in March of 2021 when Joe Biden was already doing president things, right? He was already running he was already in the White House. And so I read this. I was randomly reading this, and I thought to myself, oh, what? You're one of those people. Why? Why are you saying this? This has nothing to do with your business, right? You sell food, you sell things. Why are you getting involved in this? But my reaction, so that was my reaction as a researcher, but as a regular person, my reaction was, I don't even know if I want to buy anything from you. Like this is, and I never bought anything anyway, but now I really don't. So I never looked for their thing, and I'm like, But then I read a few days later that there were other people who were very happy with what he said, and said, oh, you should buy his things because he is standing up for, election security, and yes, so already, and most of the people who were supporting him were, you can kind of imagine, were, for America, you would call it Republican, right? That's their political party. You can call them conservatives. And I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. Why am I reacting like that? I don't even buy his products anyway. Why should I care? And then I thought, But why is he even doing this? What is the benefit for him? Right? What is the point? I'll give you another example. So this is not, so it's not only happening in America, but in Italy. So several years ago, the CEO of Barilla Pasta. So Barilla is one of the largest pasta companies in the world. It's been around for generations. It's family owned. So the CEO of Barilla is driving in his very nice car. You know, he's very happy. Barilla is doing great. And so he turns on the radio because the chairman of Barilla, which outranks him, the chairman, whose name is Guido Barilla, so he owns Barilla, it's his company, right? So he's giving an interview to somebody on the radio, and they're talking about what is your legacy? Barilla has been in Italy for so many generations. And suddenly, so he's driving, and suddenly he hears this chairman say, oh, and we would never have a same-sex couple in any of our marketing because we don't agree with this. And then he didn't stop there, and then he went on to say, and also, I also don't like when same-sex couples adopt children. I think it is wrong. And the CEO of Barilla stopped his car and said, what is happening? And he called all kinds of people, and he called the PR people. He said, what is he saying? Why is he saying this? And he said, we don't know. We didn't, you know, he didn't expect it, he just said it because it's his personal opinion. So since then, 5, 6 years after that, Barilla has now been deliberately trying to make up for that one interview that he gave. So the CEO said, "This, you cannot do this, right?" So so the chairman apologized, and now they sponsor prominent LGBT, celebrities that are trying to make up for the public relations damage. And again, you said, why would the owner of the company even, a very successful company even do it? So I started thinking about this, and I guess other people did too. It's a very new area for marketing and business people to start to look at. So that's what I'm going to present about today. So hopefully those stories were sort of illustrative of what I'm kind of going to talk about. So what I'm actually going to talk about is two separate concepts put together. One of the concepts is the political ideology and how it affects how people consume things or buy things or throw away things. That is going to be combined with, there's a separate research on how people respond when a company takes on a social issue, right? Taking a stand, we call that. When it has nothing to do with their business, right? It is not Nike dealing with issues about who actually makes their shoes in Vietnam or China, about child labor and things like that, because that is related to their business. Those are the supply chain, right? That's the people who actually make the shoes. So that they should deal with because it's related to their business. But other issues like same-sex marriage, it's nothing to do with Nike, doesn't do with what they do. Abortion, all these things that are controversial in America, why do companies even do it? How do people respond? So I sort of combine the political ideology research that's coming out and kind of how people respond to that. So first, I'll kind of do on the consumer side on political ideology. So I was a bit nervous presenting to this institute because I thought, okay, well, I'm just in marketing. These people are really political scientists. So whatever I'm going to say, they're probably like, no, that's not what that is. But okay, let's see. So what is political ideology, since that's what the whole thing is about? Ideology, from my understanding, is very difficult to define exactly because it's one of these concepts. It's like creativity, which I also gave a talk about a few weeks ago. Creativity is very vague, kind of. Just like ideology, it's a way of thinking, but it's shaped. So whenever you read definitions of ideology, they have similarities, but they're also rather different. So you kind of have to choose. So I went with, so John C. Joss is one of the, so this approach is a socio-psychological approach to political ideology. So even the psychologists are taking it from the original political science, right, and they're adapting it. So John Joss basically, it's a belief system comprised of an interrelated set of morals and values and political attitudes, that's political ideology, about the proper structure and functioning of society. It's basically your belief through politics about how society should be, how it's arranged, what is good, what is bad, morally right, what is wrong. Right? It is a very general definition because it's hard to make it more specific than that. Right? Political affiliation, though, is not the same thing. So you will sometimes read, especially in popular press, if you read, you'll often see that people conflate them together. People think they're the same thing. They talk about them in the same way. So political affiliation is usually considered the party you feel you belong, like you vote for this party, right? I'm a Democrat, so I vote for Democrats. I'm liberal, so I vote for Democrats. And it's not the same as your political identity is not the same as your affiliation. They're often correlated very strongly. In America, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is the American or Western context. And one of the reasons I wanted to, talk with the Institute is nobody has really studied this, at least, that I'm aware of, in other cultures. Does it even happen? How do people respond differently? So that's kind of part of the reasons that I'm giving this presentation. So I kind of want to hear your sort of input as well. So they're often used as synonyms, but even though they're not, although they're very strongly correlated. So in America, we often think Republicans are conservative and Democrats are liberal, right? That's the usual thing you hear. But they're not. So as I'm going to talk about, being a liberal is not the same as being a Democrat. You can be a liberal Republican and you can be a conservative Democrat. The Democrat and Republican is the party you belong to and you might vote for. The conservative or liberalness of yourself is really more about your outlook on the way society is. And they tend to go together, but not always. Okay, that's weird. I don't know why that's down there. Never mind. So, the academic interest. For centuries, right? So political ideology has been studied for centuries, a long time, right? Going back to before there was even really voting. Because monarchies, you can consider monarchies a form of government, right? And there's politics going on in monarchies. Everybody's trying to politic, they all want power, different groups want power. So even going back then, right? But largely they study voting behavior, right? Political institutes study voting behavior. Voting, donations to political parties, perceptions of politicians, things like that. In the past 20 years, there's been a huge resurgence of interest among psychologists. So social psychologists have kind of said, ooh, this is really kind of interesting, right? From a psychological perspective, not for voting behavior. There's already tons of research on voting behavior. We don't need to research that. But how does your political ideology affect other behaviors and thoughts, right? There's hundreds of studies being published already, often focused on, non-political behavior. In the past 5 years, though, business and marketing people, especially in management, decided, ooh, that's interesting, because now businesses in America are starting to do it, whereas they didn't before, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we focused on the impact of ideology on consumer behaviors and perceptions, right? And actually, in management, I have colleagues in the management department, they're studying it from the opposite direction. So they study it from the leader's direction and say, if you are a CEO of a company, and you are liberal or conservative, does that affect not your leadership style, but does that affect the outcomes of the company? Do you make more money? Are you more creative? Do you have more innovations? Whatever. So my whole approach, and the approach of most people in marketing, is to adopt the socio-psychological approach as a frame of reference. So, you often hear this conservative liberal thing framed as right and left, especially in Western context, especially in America, the right and the left. So John said, although the left-right distinction is not airtight, because there's a lot of fuzziness in there, it has been the single most useful and parsimonious way to classify political ideology for more than 200 years. It's just an easy way for people to think about it, right? On the right and the left. Just out of curiosity, why is the right, so why did this right hand versus left hand come about? Do you know? It has nothing to do with I didn't come up with this, but does anybody know? Why is the right usually considered in support of the status quo and the left is liberal and it's usually trying to fight against it? Does anybody know? Just randomly.
French Revolution?
Sorry?
French Revolution?
Yes! Aha! Why he's the leader of the Institute. That's why. Right? Yes. During the French Revolution, now you ruined it. Now during the French Revolution, those in support of the monarchy sat on the right side of Parliament. Right? Those of you who support us, you sit on the right. And those of you who do not support us, or you want us to go away, or whatever you want us to change, you sit on the left. So that's where it kind of became more popularized. But actually, it goes back even before. So this idea of the right went back to the Middle Ages. So in the Middle Ages, the right was considered in a religious way as being the right hand of God. That people who were good and proper and followed Christian teachings, they were right, like they were correct, but also they were on the right hand, so it doesn't make sense. Whereas the people who were not so following, well, they are on the left. Yeah, I'm on the left. So this idea of the left as being not so religious, not following very well, or started a little bit religiously back then, and then it really became during the French Revolution that it became popular to conceptualize it that way, in a Western context. I don't know in a lot of Asian cultures in politics, do they have the same idea? I'm not sure, of right and left. But that's in a lot of Western sort of thinking about it, it's always just talked about in that way. Over time, the right became considered as conservative, and the left became liberal. So I'm just going to use abbreviations in a lot of later parts of the presentation. So just over time, it just kind of developed that way. Why is this always with the bottom? Anyway, I don't know. So, general differences we found. In general, conservatives versus liberals, I'm just going to summarize, are more risk averse, right? Conservatives don't take as much risk. This is not politically, this is just in general in their life. They have greater resistance to change, and social change especially. It's not that they don't want any change, they just want it to be slower, right? They don't think things should change very fast. They have a lot of respect for tradition. They have greater uncertainty avoidance. They don't like uncertainty as much, right? Even though it's unavoidable, but they don't want it as much. And they have lower uncertainty tolerance. They want things to be a bit more definite, more black and white. Like, yes, this is our tradition, this is what we should do. Lower tolerance for ambiguity, less openness to new experience. Right? This is what they found in psychological studies. They have great respect and deference for authority. Authority can be defined differently in different cultures, but generally it's powerful leaders, president, prime minister, whichever country you're in, police, military, CEO for a company, right? Senior leaders. When senior leaders say something, yes, we'll do it, right? Because they're the leader, so we should do it, right? They prioritize responsibility, personal, and maintenance of structure and order. Partly why they like powerful leaders and police, because they keep order, right? Things are okay. And again, it's not that liberals don't like order. It's not that liberals want chaos and just everybody has no laws. It's just the degree of it. So liberals tend to prioritize individuality more so, and free expression and change. Again, not just change because we want to change, but good change, whatever liberal people define as good change. So again, just remember, political affiliation is not the same as the ideology you have. You can be a liberal Republican, you can be a conservative Democrat. So just an example, in the US, Asian Americans, when they give them these conservative liberal measures, they're almost always more conservative in general. Even the second, third generations generally tend to be more conservative than Caucasian or African American, but they very heavily vote for Democrats, even though they're conservative. So it's not that just because you are conservative, you automatically vote Republican. Right? And even within that, there's this idea in the US that, well, it's usually people who are not white who vote for liberals, right? Who vote for Democrats. And they said, no, that's not true. Right now, it's become it's hard to predict now. Right? They used to think, oh yeah, Hispanics will always vote for them. No, actually it's become very close now. It's become very close. It's now at like 60%, something like that, vote Democrat, whereas before it used to be in the 80s. But it's sort of gone now. Which is surprising given who has been leading the country for a while. Not always the biggest fan of Hispanic people, certain leaders America has had. But, So, what about consumers though? What does it have to do with consumption? Are there any actual differences by your ideology? Well, yes. There haven't been many studies, but there's emerging. And what they found so far, so conservatives complain less, officially, in response to product failure or a service failure. You go to the store and, you go to the store, somebody gives you bad service. Would you complain to the manager? Maybe. But they find conservatives will complain less. If you buy a product on Amazon or wherever you buy it and it comes to your house and it's kind of it's torn or something, liberals are more tend to complain officially, meaning take it back, say give me a refund, do all these things. Conservatives, they don't like it. I mean, they don't want a broken product either. But they generally will not as much complain officially. They will still complain online. They will still post on social media that this was terrible, but not officially to authority, right, to get back a refund. Which is kind of interesting. They respond more to stability appeals, which makes sense, right? Because of what we just said. So in an ad, if you say, our company has been here for 100 years, sometimes you see a company say, we are established in, 1885. They respond very well to that. right? Establish it. But if you frame it differently and focus on a change appeal, we have been innovating for 100 years, changing for 100 years. You've still been around for 100 years. But if you focus on the fact that you've been changing all the time, right? And dealing with the times, changing as you go, they don't respond as well. And liberals like that appeal better, even though it's sort of the same message, right? And individuality appeals, tend to work better. Also for charity advertisements, to donate money to good causes, if you frame it differently, it works more effectively for conservatives. Conservatives are less likely to boycott or boycott. Boycotts are the opposite. Boycott is not buying a product. Boycott is we will buy it because we like it. They're less likely to say that they will boycott, either do a boycott, which most people don't actually do one, or participate in one. So they're less likely. Whereas liberals are more willing to say they will, not buy a product because of that. So they have generally a stronger preference for domestic, large, well-known brands, right? Kind of made in America, but also just generally large brands, right? It's safer, it's the, you go authority, right? It's the big brand, good. They have lower preference, again, kind of makes sense given what I said before. They have lower preference for new, more novel products, more innovative products. They'll be more resistant. It's not that they won't buy it, but they'll wait longer, right? They want to wait until it becomes not so innovative, where it's, okay, it's not so new, more people have used it, so we'll wait, right? They're laggards, I guess, if you do innovation research. They kind of lag behind. So that's there's other, they found other, but these are generally the most common ones that they found. Okay, but political ideology is not a theory by itself, right? It is a construct. It doesn't explain why these things. So there have been various mechanisms developed for why these findings are like this. The most common one is the SJT, about system justification, where basically you say this is the way the system is, and you have a tendency to say, well, it's status quo preference, right? This is the way things are. Society is like this. As long as society is stable and ordered, that's more important than other things. Sometimes even if the person themselves who believes this does not really benefit from the status quo, right? You can not benefit. You can be very low income. You're not benefiting from how great all the economy is doing. But you can still believe that, well, yes, I'm not benefiting, but it's the status quo. There's not much you can do, almost, right? It is the way things are, and it's better. Stability is better. Okay, well, I just said that. The degree to which people have a tendency to perceive existing social structures as fair and legitimate. So that tends to extend to, but if you're not benefiting from this, why would you believe this? Well, because if I am not doing well, I personally, but other people are, it's because of me. So the blame tends to be ascribed, the responsibility for why tends to be ascribed to the individual. If you work harder, you can have more money, your family can be better off. So it is our fault. It is me as an individual, because we can't do anything about the status quo. So what can we do anything about? Ourselves. So responsibility is on us. Even when it goes against one's own needs or interests. You get comfort from the world to be predictable, right? And have a sense of control. And and conservatives are higher on this, obviously, than liberals. This is not inherently a political measure. It can be, you don't have to associate it with being conservative or liberal, right? It can just be a personal kind of way of being, but it's usually associated with that as an explanation. So it leads to reinforcing the status quo, again, even if it doesn't benefit you, which means you're resistant to change. And if you think about what this extends to, it extends to things like how much immigration you want to your country. Because if your country is very diverse, like America is, right, very diverse, but if you don't like a lot of change to happen, and if suddenly many people around you don't look like you, that's a lot of change happening. You think so, right? So a lot of times it becomes, if you take it to an extreme, it becomes sort of, we should limit immigration. We don't want foreign people coming, right? So it's fear of the unknown, right? Because people are not like me or whatever they're thinking they are. Right? So you accept inequality, a lot of inequality, right? In income, of status, because that's the way society is structured. Some people will have and some people will not. Even if you don't have, which is, you would think, well, if you're one of the people who don't have, why would you? But okay. Right? So the shift of blame or responsibility goes to the individual, like I just said. This has not been researched as much, but it's starting to emerge that it sort of extends to, it's sort of pointless to fight the system, right? There's a sort of like, why should I try to get my money back from that company? What for? They exist to make money. They're not going to return, so it's just a lot of effort. It's fine, right? It's not worth doing it. As an extension, while the status quo is preferable, right, if you're more conservative, and it's hard to change, what can be changed is yourself, right? And so personal responsibility is key to a lot of conservatives, at least in the Western culture, right? That you're responsible for what you do. Now, let's switch for a second, right? So now I'm going to talk about the corporate side. So back when, so a few minutes ago when I was talking, when we were talking, if you're a company and you sell burgers or whatever you want to sell, anything in your mind if you had a company, what is the benefit to you of taking a position on a controversial social issue? Most companies up until recently in America did not. So they avoided it. Let's say you're an airline and you just fly people. You just take people from one country to another, from one state to another. You're United Airlines or American Delta, what big other. Why would you start talking about, yes, we think same-sex marriage laws should change? The people who don't agree with you are going to be upset, right? And they'll be angry, so your brand. The people who agree with you, well, they'll be happy. But why would you upset a segment? Why would you upset any segment, right? Just we don't want to upset anybody. That's what most corporations would have thought up until a few years ago, right? No matter what category. They said, well, there's no, of course, all the leaders and people had their own individual beliefs, but they wouldn't say them in an official way. But that's changing now. So consumer activism has been studied a lot. There's a lot of research on why people boycott, what makes people boycott, what do companies do that consumers don't like. There's a lot of reactance against big business, right? People want to avoid ads, right? They use ad blockers and the networks so we can track them. There's shoplifting, theft. There's all kinds of studies that have been done on rumor and gossip, spreading, people maliciously doing things against companies because they don't like them. Okay. But companies have not been, so companies have been doing activism for a long time. They just haven't done it out loud. They've done it quietly. Right? Organizations have been involved in politics and social responsibility for a long time, but they've not been so open to the consumer about it. So in politics, at least in America, every large company has a lobbying arm. It's a whole division of lobbying, right? Hospitals, the medical industry, the insurance industry, every big industry is lobbying politicians so that they don't make laws that damage either their business or things like that, right? They give political donations. Sometimes the corporation gives it, sometimes the individual leader gives it. There is a whole department of government relations. Government relations is a specific area of public relations. It's all about dealing with government, right? Quietly trying to influence senators, leaders, quietly trying to fight for positive or at least non-negative laws for themselves, right? And other things like that. CSR has been a big thing for businesses, corporate social responsibility, right? You can summarize it actually, it's very simple. You can say, we can do good while doing well, right? We can make money, but also do good, right? Yes, we're making money, and for most for-profit businesses, that is their main goal, right? The shareholders want that, but we can also do good at the same time, right? So, but it's usually CSR is in regard to their business, to what they actually do. So if you sell coffee, right? You could do ethical supply chain sourcing, making sure that the farmers who harvest the coffee for you are paid fairly and that they're not taken advantage of, right? But that has to do with your business as a coffee company. Makes sense that you would care about that, right? That's part of what you're doing. That's social responsibility. Reducing your carbon footprint, environmental impact. Yeah, because if you're an airline, I mean, do you know how much pollution it is to fly a plane? Just one trip causes so much, carbon footprint, right? Their industry. So, they know that, and so they try to do what they can. Right? But taking a stand is something really new, where they take on social issues that have nothing to do with their business directly. Same-sex marriage. Abortion is still one that most companies won't do anything about, because they say, no, we're not going to, nope, not getting involved yet, but I expect soon it might, because there's things going on in America right now, like literally in the next few months, that they might get involved, but so far they haven't touched that one. But so now they come up with a separate term for it, which is corporate socio-political activism, right? Or in PR, so in public relations field, they're starting to study it too. They call it something very similar. This is becoming increasingly common, not just in America, but in the West in general, in Europe, some companies in Australia. Well, why does it happen? Well, political polarization is extreme in America now, right? Or it's perceived to be. Consumers increasingly demand that companies take these positions. They say, yeah, it's nice that you're pro-environment. Sure. Okay, great. But, what about your employees who work there? You have gay and lesbian employees who work at your company. What is your stance on that? So now it's sort of coming from the consumer, right? Because things are so polarized, now consumers are saying, yeah, but what is a corporation? A company is people. The company doesn't do anything without people there, right? And business leaders, they're willing now to do this, because they've also got a sense of things are changing a lot. This country is becoming very polite, so we are people. I'm a CEO, but I have an opinion, right? Sometimes CEOs try to have it both ways. They try to say, I'm not speaking for the company. I'm just speaking for myself. Like, yeah, but you're the CEO of, Procter & Gamble. You're a very powerful person. If you say we believe, well, who's we? Oh, Procter & Gamble. Even though you're just talking about yourself, but you are the CEO. Every time you speak in public, you speak on behalf of your company. So in my class I'm teaching I was teaching as a visiting professor, I had the head of PR for Google, the Taiwan branch, speak to our class. And she said, so at Google, they don't allow even senior leadership. Even senior leaders have to clear everything they say first. So the PR division has a lot of power, because even the CEO can't, you're like, no, you're not going to go and talk about your opinions on this unless we know you're going to talk about it. It's very controlled, right? Because they don't want these kinds of things to happen. Right? They don't want suddenly to hear about, what? What's your position? Oh no, what have you said? Right? Because Google is such a interconnected in everywhere. So they're increasingly willing to take a stand on a position. So this is kind of, you can see this chart, kind of how much, so corporate, so CSR, your traditional CSR, right? It's routine, it has not really a lot of promotion. A lot of times companies don't even announce that they just do these things. Sometimes they don't even tell people, or they don't really promote it that much. So there's low publicity. Partisanship is how controversial the issue is, how much there's split of opinion. Pro-environment used to be controversial, but even now, even in the US, now it's sort of, almost everybody accepts that the environment is changing for the worse. They may not agree on why. There's still a lot of people like, but it's natural, but it's because of, it's because of man-made. They may not agree on why, but generally they agree that it is and we need to do something about it. So it's not so partisan anymore, environmental issue. The partisan is what you do about it, but the issue itself is not so partisan anymore. Sometimes they do CSR that is very high promotion, and they want people to know about it because they benefit from that. Corporate political activity, donating to politicians and lobbying, things like that, right? The partisanship is high because in the US everything is very partisan right now, but the publicity is low. They don't tell you, today we donated $1 million to this group. They don't announce that. That's very quiet. They just do that. That's public information in America, by the way. It's public record. You can look it up yourself, right? Anybody can look it up, but most people don't. Right? But they don't announce it. They don't say we donate to Biden, we donate to Trump re-elected. They don't say any of that. Right? But corporate socio-political activism is down here. It's high publicity because they announce. we support this, we don't support this. And it's very partisan. They're usually getting into something that there's a lot of difference in society about. Man, why did this stuff randomly? All right, so I already told you this example, but really, here's some examples. Nike, right? So Nike, when Colin Kaepernick, famous campaign, right? He was encouraging athletes to kneel, right, during the national anthem. People who didn't like that said, you're disrespecting the national anthem, how dare you, you're an athlete, just go play. And he said, this is not about disrespecting that, this is about, you know, it's making a point about police brutality, and then other athletes in other sports started doing it as well, and in other countries as well, right? That they would kneel instead of stand during the national anthem. Okay. Now, Papa John's is a pizza company, and they were very mad about this for some reason. They said, oh, how dare you, athletes? It's a pizza company, but okay. So Papa John's, a very big pizza company, said, wow, he was very upset. The CEO was extremely upset. And he said, we will not, at one point he said, we refuse to be the endorser, the official pizza of the teams that have athletes who, you know, who kneel during the anthem. So, and then a lot of consumers were really upset at him, and so he changed his mind, and he said, okay, well, maybe we won't do that. Goya Foods, I told you about, right? Trump is the real, the legitimate, still the actual president. Again, why do you get involved in this, right? I mean, if he believes this, okay, that's fine. He can believe that, but he can keep it quiet. And if he really believes it, he can lobby and donate to those groups that are, you know, doing whatever. He doesn't have to announce it to everybody, but he does. Delta Airlines. So Delta Airlines not only, so there was a school shooting, which happens a lot in America, so there was a school shooting, and Delta Airlines, which is an airline, has nothing to do with making guns. Delta Airlines used to give a discount to members of the National Rifle Association, the NRA, but they gave them a discount not because they're the NRA. They gave them a discount because they're a non-profit. Is that all non-profits get discounted rate if you're a member. We don't care what your affiliation is, but consumers found out that Delta gave discounts to the NRA. And they were really mad because the school shooting happened where Delta headquarters is, like in that city. They said, how can you, they were really upset. So Delta withdrew. So they said, we support gun, not having no guns, but gun control legislation, and they removed the discount just for the NRA. Other nonprofits, that's okay. And they specifically said, so they really got into. And then the senators from Georgia, which Delta's headquartered in Georgia, the senators were very mad. Said, who are you to get involved in this, right? Just run your airline. And then the leader said, you're telling us we can have no opinion, right? We're citizens of this country too. It's our business. We're private business. We can do whatever we, it's not state business. It's not state airline. Who are you to tell? And so they got into so everybody got into a fight about everything, right? Everything is a fight now in America. Everything is a fight. Lowe's is a hardware store. They just sell, lumber, tables. So they removed ads. So even just removing marketing from, there's a channel that had a reality show called All American Muslim. It's just about Muslim family. It's nothing, nothing. The leader for some reason did not want to promote Muslim lifestyle, so they pulled all the ads during it when he found out. Now he didn't say anything about it. He didn't make a speech about it. But people said, why would you remove? Yeah, you're taking a stand by doing that. You may not say anything, but you're doing it. Okay, I have a lot of examples. Again, in Georgia, a lot of this happens in Georgia for some reason. At one point, the politicians in Georgia had a bill saying, if you have a sincere religious belief, you can deny service if you're a business to people you don't agree with. What they really meant was, if somebody who's gay comes into your bakery and you don't want to make the cake for them because you're a Christian and you really don't like it, you don't have to. It's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to hire people who are gay for that reason, and you can say it's for that reason. So Disney, CBS, NJ, Netflix, so they all have studios in Georgia, actually. That might surprise you, but Georgia has been very good about giving money to studios. So they said, if you sign this bill, we're leaving. So if they told the governor, if you sign this bill, we're leaving. We're taking all our studios and we're going back to Hollywood, we're not going to employ those people in this state. Right. And the governor didn't sign it. He said, think about it. He said, okay, and he didn't sign it. Right? So they were, again, exercising that we don't agree with this, and if you don't, we're leaving. All right, so how does it happen? You know, the CEO announces things, they release press releases. These are fairly normal ways, right? They announce it publicly somehow. Sometimes it's through the personal account of the leader. Sometimes it's through the official account, right? Sometimes they just post it on social media, but regardless, that is the stance. Because once you post it in public, that's the stance you're taking, right? You can't really take it back. I mean, you can delete it, but nowadays nothing is deleted online. Everybody takes it, everybody, you can always find it again. Okay. Academic research is very limited. It's largely exploratory. So this is one of the only ones that looked at how it actually affects businesses. And in general, they found whenever a company announces a stance, it has negative effect on stock price. Their stock price goes down somewhat. And investors usually don't like it. They said, why are you making these announcements? Stop, right? We're losing money as investors. Don't make any of these announcements. Unless, so it's the opposite, unless if the stand matches the investors, if their values match it, then they like it. Then they're okay with it. Then the stock market doesn't, right? But generally, their stock price goes down whenever a company does it. So it's kind of interesting. So authenticity is key to this. Why are you taking this stance, right? In America, there's a lot of issues now about social justice, about race differences, right? Ethnicity. One of the, there's a lot of comments that it's very easy to take that on as an issue because who is against racial equality? No company is going to take the other stance, right? There's no company going to say, yeah, we don't believe races are equal. Nobody's going to do that. No, right? So it's kind of every company says they believe in, and they say, really, you all believe in it? But what are you doing? You're just saying this. But what are you actually doing about it in your employees you hire and things like that? Right. Okay, so, I know I've been talking. How long have I been talking? Oh, good. All right. So I'm going to talk briefly about projects that my colleagues and I are doing. They're in the work, well, two of them have been collected, so I'll talk about those mainly. If we have time, I'll talk about the third one. So these are the two people I'm working with. They're all at my university. So Dr. McHarris is a management professor, so she studies it from a different angle, but so we're all kind of interested in this issue. So basically, we gave a pre-survey to people and measured all these various things. So, okay, I'm not going to talk about this. I'll talk about this in a minute. So we had a survey measure. We had a physiological measure, which we thought might be interesting. So it's GSR. GSR, very quickly, is just your heart rate, sweat, and things like that, very basically. It's a physical measure, but it generally correlates with because you can't control it, right? It's not something you can say, should I say that on this paper or not? So you can't control it. But generally, if there's a strong reaction, it's usually related with, they usually assume there's some kind of emotional reaction happening as well. It's not just, oh, I sweated more, right? But there's a reason, right? There's something that matches with it. And then we give a post after we showed them. I'll show you in a minute what we showed them. How much affect did you have? How much your brand attitude? How much were you intending to buy this product after we showed them the different things? And would you be willing to organize a boycott, support a boycott, post a comment, etc.? One of the challenges is how do you measure political ideology? Because there's lots of ways to measure it. There's a growing consensus in marketing. It should be measured at least two ways because there's not one scale that can capture it because it's complicated. So our measures, we had a single item measure, which is very common, very liberal to very conservative. Overall, in your view on politics and society, how do you place yourself between very liberal and very conservative? Just what do you think you are? So that's a very direct measure, right? You think about it, you tell us. Then we had another measure, the 5-item, this is social orientation. And it doesn't ask them specifically about it. It just asks them, what is your opinion about capital punishment? That's like execution of prisoners, abortion rights, same-sex marriage, gun control, and socialized medicine. We picked those because these are usually very controversial. These are things that have been controversial a long time in America, and there's differences usually by conservative and liberal, Republican, Democrats. Right? And usually they find when you ask both of these, they usually will go together, and together they kind of indicate the ideology of the person. Right? This one asks it indirectly because it doesn't ask them, are you conservative or liberal? It just asks them, what's your opinion on these things? So because of the physical measure, and it takes a lot of effort to run people through the lab, so we had a convenience sample. It's a small sample. It's about 70 for two groups. So it's convenience sample largely because of the physiological measure. So we chose gun control because it's been decades, it's controversial, right? It's a long time issue. So this is a real brand, so it's a real brand from Ohio, but not a lot of people know it even in Ohio. So the familiarity is very low. It's an Ohio-based maker of footwear, like it just sells outdoor shoes and things. It does not sell guns. It doesn't sell anything to do with it. It doesn't make them, doesn't sell them, it has nothing to do with it. But it does sell things like, are you going hunting? Do you want a vest to go hunting? Which needs guns, but they don't sell the actual bullets or fire, nothing like that. They do not sell guns, even among Ohioans. Okay, so this is just an example. So this is that they support gun control, which is usually a liberal. They support restricting some gun control. So Rocky brands, blah, 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 blah. So in the main part, since the birth of the nation, the Second Amendment guarantees citizens' right to keep and bear arms. Such rights are meant to be altered by federal and local governments to benefit citizens. We oppose the right of law-abiding citizens to carry firearms in all 50 states. So that's their sort of stance on that. The next one is the same. It's just, we kept everything the same, and then we said, you know, we support the right. So instead of opposing, we support. So we try to keep it as much as possible and just change a couple of words to keep it the same. Right? This is an actual ad from this is the shoes they make. So we just made a mock-up of it. We showed that and see how do people respond. Now, these are college students. So you assume college students in America are probably a little bit more liberal than your average person. Although they are Ohio college students, so not always so. Sort of a mix in Ohio. It's a very purple state. It's not blue. It's very sort of, yeah. So the ones in yellow are significant. The one in red is significant, but we don't understand why it came out that way. We're very confused because it shouldn't. And so I just put it in red because I'm like, we really don't know yet why it came out like that. It should not, but it did. So basically you can see it's sort of in the predicted directions of things, right? So if you are, so higher social orientation is more liberal, lower is more conservative. If you're more liberal and you saw the support gun control one, which is a match. It's a match to what you believe, right? You're more liberal, it's a match. You're more likely to purchase it, seek information, organize a boycott. It's negative, you're less likely, right? Why would you? Because it matches what you believe. And so boycott. What is interesting about this, at least to me, is that the political orientation measure has almost no effect. So most people, when they do this analysis, they combine the two measures together. They average them together. They say, okay, we'll take SO and PO, they correlate together, so we'll combine them into one indicator, right? We'll just take the two and combine them. So we analyze them separately and go, well, actually, it's almost predicting nothing. That social orientation is really the driver of these results. So we thought, oh, so asking people just explicitly, are you this? I mean, they can answer it, and they correlate, so they go together. But really the thing that's supporting is being the social orientation. And it's interesting, when people see the against gun control, right? So these are people who generally, if you're against gun control, you're normally considered more conservative. Right? You don't want Second Amendment to restrictions on it. But there's almost, there's no effect of it. So this kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning, right? So even when people, there's no relationship. So even conservatives, when they see something that matches, they're not particularly willing, you know, it doesn't really affect them to buy the product more. But when they see something against, right, that doesn't match, they also are not really willing, right, except in that one weird case. They're not really willing, again, to, it's not like, yeah, I'm gonna support a boycott because I don't agree with this. No, not really gonna do that. Now, this is the physiological measure, and it switches. So in the physiological measure, a lot of the reaction was seen when it was a mismatch. So when liberals, social liberals, saw the ad against gun control, okay, that should warn you. So when they saw the ad against, then they had all the reactions, right? Again, conservatives though, they only had a reaction when, you know, when there was system just, but Yeah, so that one is a bit odd as well, because usually we just ran it as a separate variable, but system justification is not usually used as a predictor. It's usually used to compare this liberal and political orientations, which we did, and they worked out the ways they were supposed to, right? The more liberal you were, the less system justification you had, the more conservative you had higher, right? Which is what is supposed to come out. But again, you saw almost no reaction for support. So the reactions physiologically and self-report were the switched, were the opposite, which is kind of interesting. You know? Okay, right, moving on. These are qualitative. Why is it this weird way? Qualitative reactions. I'm not going to go through this, but some people didn't like it. Some people said, why do you have an opinion on guns? You make shoes. Stop having opinions on guns. Why should you? Some of them said, oh, I appreciate, right? Support the Second Amendment. I stand with you. Right? Support Second Amendment means you're against gun control. Right? Yes, I stand with you. Right? All right, project thoughts. The results of the self-report are all driven almost pretty much by social orientation. I kind of talked about that already. There's no impact or difference at all for the against gun control position. It's kind of interesting. Even by conservatives, it doesn't really make them more or less likely to buy the product or have an attitude about it. Kind of going back to the idea about what's the point. It is the way it is, right? Status quo acceptance. Okay, so project 2, we decided, okay, gun control is fine, that's controversial. But when we were doing this, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And we realized somehow mask wearing has become political in this country. Somehow. In Taiwan, it's not. Everybody just wears their mask nicely and goes about their business, right? I'm sure people don't like it that much, but they don't like make protests in front of the government building, right? But increasingly, it's become very political. What? I must wear a mask? Usually, and there's been lots of public polling, it's usually Republican or conservatives who are very much against this idea that you have to, that there's a requirement that you wear it, right? And usually liberals say, well, yes, you should wear it. So what? Have a requirement, right? For the safety of everybody. It's not a political issue, it's a medical safety issue, right? All right. But because there are differences, we decided to do it. And it wasn't an issue before COVID. Mask wearing was not an issue before COVID. It became one during COVID, right? Which is kind of interesting. Because it's weird, because I thought conservatives are deferential to authority, right? They like authority. They will respect, yes, they respect authority. If the leader says, you are required to wear it, just wear it, you would think conservatives would say, okay, no, wear it. No. Nope. Not doing that. But because America is so strange, it depends which leader is saying it. because there's different kinds of leaders, right? Although, so it's interesting because in some Republican states, Republican leaders have said, you need to wear a mask, and they've issued mandates, right? So you would think, okay, in those states, most of the people are Republican, they'd be okay with it. They're not. They are upset with the Republican leaders that, no, you're basically forcing the government is forcing me to do this. A lot of them have said, we would wear masks anyway. But the fact that you made me, I'm not wearing it. It's almost like a child. My 6-year-old is like that. What? You want me to eat this? No. But you would eat it anyway, even if I didn't tell you, you'd eat it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, what can we do about that? Okay, so mask wearing, okay? On the one hand, the deferential authority approach status quo, all right? Actually, interestingly, conservatives, they've done studies around the world, and countries that are more conservative are also actually more, so in countries that have more disease in general, more pathogens, they're usually more conservative. Because pandemics, disease, what do? They upset social structure, right? It disrupts our way of life. You have to wear masks, you have to get back, you have to stay away from people. It disrupts everything, you have to be at home all the time. It disrupts everything. You would think, if you're a conservative, don't you want things to go back to the social structure? You want things to be stable. Wouldn't you wear the mask and get your vaccine so that things go back? But no. So I'll talk about that in a minute, why that is. We heard it again. So they're against it. Right? Here's some historical trivia, because I like to add historical trivia. So vaccines have also become very political in America, right? Biden is trying to make a requirement that companies that employ over 100 people, they must do it. Companies were upset as well. Almost with the same logic. They said, you can't make us, but you also can't prohibit us. We don't want either one. We're a company. We have the right to decide what you want to do with our employees. Right? Now, before COVID, actually conservatives had higher rates of vaccination. Not for COVID, but generally of their kids. They had higher rates of vaccination of their children and themselves than Democrats did. But they were much more against being forced to do it. They said, yes, everybody should give it. Yes, you should. Why wouldn't you? But don't make me. The government should not be mandating that I do it. Actually, the anti-vaccine movement in America was not started by conservatives. It was started by upper middle class white women, liberals in California. Because they thought there were all kinds of, that basically started from they thought vaccines gave children autism. They still think that. For any vaccine, not just, for flu or anything, right? They think it gives people autism. It doesn't. But they think that. So they started it. It was not. But now it's become, because of COVID, it's like, oh, you're a Republican, you're against science. They're not against science, but they're against the forcing of science. So in Taiwan, it's interesting, there's no requirement that you get vaccinated, right? There's no mandate. Government doesn't say you must. That's probably because most everybody probably will, right? I've not heard, I don't know, maybe, but I've not heard a lot of like, oh, half the population will not. A lot of people are getting it, so they figure, okay, not everybody will, but it's such a small percentage. Okay, right? How would you feel if they started making it, no, here's a rule, you must. I think I'd be a little bit weird about it, like, I must. Maybe I'm too American now. I've been living in America a long time. I'm like, what? I must? Now I don't want to. But you reduce your chance of dying. I still don't want to. All right, so, okay, I'm gonna skip this. All right, so we decided we're not gonna have the physiological measure. So now we have a general sample from Amazon Turk. We have 240 participants. And so now we use two big real brands. So one big real brand, and then one small, the same brand, Rocky brand. So the same kind of thing, except now, basically, we either said all customers are recommended to wear a mask. You don't have to, you can, but we recommend you to. Versus you are required, you must wear it to come into the store. And then we change the brand, you're recommended, you have to, okay. Results are very messy. They're kind of messy, they're not clean. Sometimes I read articles and these results look very clean. They're like, oh look, the two cross perfectly here. That's not real, how is that real? That data is never like that among humans, but okay. So in terms of the amount of negative emotions people had, social conservatives had significantly more negative affect when masks were required. Like a lot. They had a lot of negative feelings about it when it was required. But when it was recommended, there was no difference between the two. It's like, oh, recommendation. It's okay. Thanks for your recommendation. We will or we won't. Right? There were no difference between political conservatives, so political and social conservatives are different, by brand or mask policy. So the political one had no effect again. Generally, there was more negative feelings for the unfamiliar brand, Rocky, generally. Attitude change, there was no real attitude change. It was mostly for the unfamiliar brand, but that's because people had not heard of it, so their attitude changed after they see it. But if you're Timberland's a giant company in the US. If you already have a strong opinion about Timberland, if you see one thing, it's unlikely to change it that much after one exposure. So we kind of expected that. Social conservatives were more likely than liberals to post a negative social media comment. Again, for mask required. When it was recommended, no difference. That means that's important. There's no difference between political conservatism. Again, no real difference by political conservatism. Although political conservatives were more likely than liberals for the familiar brand, they were more likely overall to post negative social media comments. There was no difference here, but political conservatives were more likely to support boycotts, right? In all conditions, but even more so when they were required. And there's no difference about posting positive comments or posting, so there was no difference for any of that. So my general thoughts so far. So we're writing this up now, we're trying to send it to a journal, so we're still working on that. Data is a bit messy, but that's okay because the issue is kind of messy. Political ideology shouldn't be measured in one way, right? Because if you saw from our results, it was a social orientation measure that was driving it. But actually, there is now other scholars saying there's actually more ways you can measure that. You could measure it, but economic conservatism is not the same as social conservatism or liberalism, right? So that can distinguish people. And so we're thinking of a third study that we're going to do where we do measure that. And why not measure political party? It's one question. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Right? Because it's not the same measure. It's different. So it's really interesting what is driving ideology. Right? It seems to be social orientation, how you believe on social issues, not what you self-believe, I'm conservative, I'm liberal. Right? So we cannot assume it's the same as asking people their overall orientation. Basically, when masks were required, that's when you saw the most negative reactions by conservatives. Partly, my own hypothesis about this is that because of the maybe somewhat unique nature of America, because one of America's core things is about independence, right? It's about freedom, even for liberals, right? It's one of the myths of America, the founding brand of America is about freedom. So, if that's one of them, conservative, maybe it's unique to America, but conservative Republicans are very against when the government, authority figures, tell you directly you must do this, especially government. CEOs, okay, well, you have a job. If you don't do what the CEO says, you're fired. Okay, there's a fine, okay. But when the government tells you, there's a lot of resistance to it. Actually, even among some liberals, they're like, is that really you to tell us? You know? There are Republican governors who have publicly said, everybody should get vaccinated. Everybody should get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. And then the reporter says, are you going to require it? No. Not. And they said, why not? And there was one person who said, if I require it, less people will get it. So I'm just going to tell people, I'm just going to ask them to do it, more people, because if I make it required in my state, less people will do it. Because there's no penalty. There's not really, they're not going to put you in jail. So I'm not going to do that, no matter what. They said, but more people, the reporter said, but more people, won't more people die? He said, yes. I said, yeah, probably. But that's the situation we're in. He said, okay. It's the situation we're in. I try to tell them, but okay, I cannot force. If I force, it'll be worse. So I'm not going to. General thoughts, Project 1 results, almost driven. I just talked about that. Mix, mask wearing. So the mask wearing context is different than the gun control. Because in the gun control, it's just the company saying this is our opinion. But in the mask one, you have to do something. There is an effect on you as a consumer, right? You have to wear the mask. In the other case, it's just a shoe company saying, yeah, we support or we don't support gun control, but they didn't actually do anything. They didn't stop selling guns. They didn't sell any guns to begin with. They didn't change anything in their business. The consumer doesn't have to do anything, right? It's just an opinion. But in the case of the mask wearing, it's not just an opinion. It's if you want to come in the store, you have to wear it. So it's a little bit different context. That may explain why our results were kind of different. So I just explained that. Oh, I had a lot of general thoughts. So there's been a few studies comparing, is conservatism the same in other countries, in other cultures? So far I could only find one that's in comparing South Korea and the US. And they said actually it is, but the measures are different. So you cannot measure with the same issues. If you asked about gun control in South Korea, they would look at you like, what? It's because nobody, almost nobody has guns unless you're in the military or police or something. Right? It's not an issue for them. It's not a controversial issue. They probably don't even think about it that much. Right? But so when Yoonghwa Lee and her colleagues did the study, these are unique, that are controversial in Korea. Anti-chaebol regulations, free school meals, standardizing of high schools, welfare budget increase, abolition of national security laws, relationship with North Korea, right? Relationship with America. What is the relationship going to be like? So you have to change that's the social measure. You have to change the social, you have to change the measure. But once you change the measure, in both countries, conservatives react the same way. They are still less risk averse. They're still more risk averse. Conservatives, whether you're in Korea, whether you're in America, more risk averse, they have higher uncertainty avoidance, all the same patterns. It's just the issues are different. But that's very initial. There's only been like 2 studies comparing this, right? So it's very, very early. So it's hard to say. Maybe unique to South Korea. So we don't know. But the idea makes sense, right? The issues may be different, but the construct, the idea of being a liberal or conservative, because it's not tied to the political party. So it's part of your personality almost. It's a mental attitude. So it makes sense that it would work the same way generally in different cultures. Even though the issue you may have different about different issues because some of them have nothing to do with that country. So it makes sense in that way, but it's hard to know. So what are those issues in Taiwan? I don't know. There's a referendum coming apparently, and I was looking at some of those and I think, I don't know why these are controversial. One of them is, should we import pork with this thing? I thought, I wish this was the most controversial thing in America. Should we import this food with this chemical? I know apparently it has actually big repercussions on trade and all these things. To me, it didn't sound like, okay, well, I don't know if that's a big controversial issue. Nuclear power is one of them, right? Building a nuclear station. But do those differ by your political orientation? I don't know. He says yes. He's lying, he's like, it does. Right? Is politics divided in the same way? All I know about Taiwanese politics is the KMT and the DPP are your 2 big party blocks, right? But their big issue is about China. No. But is that the same as one is conservative, one is liberal? It did seem like it to me, do they differ on social issues? Maybe. And there's lots of other smaller parties, right? But, so, I don't know. Well, thank you. I know I went on too long. So yeah, that's that. Actually, I have 5 more slides, but I knew I would go on too long. So that's why I left them in case. But comments or questions or discussion? I know it's a lot and you're sleepy. But yes?
Quick question regarding boycotts and the incentive for companies to act a certain way. So based on your study number 1, that we see liberals tend to take action more. Whereas
they say they will.
Yeah, they say or they indicate they will. And conservatives are like, I don't care. Either way. And based on the traditional definition that you presented in the earlier slide, it's also that way, that conservatives in general say, yeah, we don't care. Right. So I'm from economics background.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that incentivize companies to actually virtue signal more on the liberal side? Because if I do anything that upsets the conservatives, they don't boycott me anyway, I still have a business. But if I actually please the liberal consumers, they will actually boycott me.
Yes. So in theory, that's correct. But imagine you're a CEO and you're personally conservative. Are you willing to, even if you want to make money, are you like, yeah, let's just please the liberal? Like, oh, I really don't want to. I don't agree with that. So your question is interesting because, so there have been studies saying, why do boycotts change CEOs' mind? Because sometimes boycotts, the CEO will back down. The company will change what they do because of boycotts. And what a lot of studies have shown is that most boycotts, for whatever reason, they have almost so little financial impact on a big company. I mean, if you're a small company, fine. But imagine somebody is boycotting Amazon. How much can you boycott Amazon that Jeff Bezos is worried? Imagine, think about it. Or any company, Procter & Gamble. Even Barilla Pasta, right? The one I talked about, the pasta company. They're $1 billion company too. Can you really not eat that much pasta? Imagine if they lost $10 million just because of the boycott. Jeff Bezos makes $10 million in like 1 week. Maybe he makes probably more than that. He can ignore that. So what they found when they interview CEOs, so there was a really interesting thing, but why do you change your behavior? And one of the reasons, especially at the senior level, is not because of money. It's actually because of legacy. So listen, when you're at that level, when you're such at a high Fortune 500 CEO, it's very prominent. And what's more important to them, beyond the small amount of money, like a few $1 million, it's not small for us, is not so much the money, it's the legacy you leave behind as the leader. And so what they think about is, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history. Because how will they look back on the CEO of Procter & Gamble or Amazon? How will they remember me? They will remember me as, oh, I'm the one who supported racism. Or I'm the one who supported, and somehow I'm doing that. I don't want to do that, so you'll change. But when they perceive, no, I'm on the right side of history, I'm not changing. So that's what the conclusion is, not really about money. When it's a small company, it's money because they can't afford to. But for a large company, it's more about almost the leader's ego a little bit, about how history will remember that person. Which is something I hadn't thought of, like it's not something I would have thought about. It's kind of interesting. Yes?
Yeah, and that actually segues into my second question.
Great.
I think the overarching political issue now is the struggle between democracy and autocracy, namely like democratic countries and countries or CCP. So in that situation, China loves to boycott. It doesn't make them liberals. I mean, that's right. But they love to boycott, right? My question is regarding the examples you gave here. A lot has to do with actions of companies and CEO and say, I virtue signal this. But what happened in the real world recently is actually companies that don't signal get into trouble with China. How do you think about that? Get into trouble with China or the US, right? It's like, oh, you don't take a stand.
Right.
That means you are on this side.
Right. Not taking a stance is taking.
Actually, you actually piss off both sides. So how does that fit into the framework of your study and how you think about how companies react to that? The inaction, the risk of inaction.
So your examples were two different countries, right? So as you said, China will boycott, and they're not, you can't call, I don't know if you could define them as liberal, at least from this way, yeah. Right? But so that's why actually partly I was curious, because if it's defined differently in a different culture, then the framework doesn't work, right? You have to adapt it. Or maybe it's that the issue is different, but a conservative in China versus a liberal in China, do they essentially operate in the same way, but just the issue is different? I don't know. It depends who runs the government, right? So there's a lot of that. You get at an interesting point about authority, right? The different ways of government, right? The democratic versus an authoritarian.
And the signaling by...
The signaling, but also the perception of what is authoritarian.
Yes.
Because in America, you should hear conservatives talking about, oh my God, Biden is a dictator. It's like, you have never met any dictators if you think that. Or even when Trump was, and liberals said the same thing. Oh my God, you're terrible. You're like an authoritarian. I said, you have never met any. You've never lived in countries where, the fact that, I always tell people, the fact that you can insult Donald Trump on his social media, you can go on his Twitter and call him an asshole. Nothing will happen to you. No, nothing. He'll get mad. But so what, right? He might call you a name. Nothing will happen to you. If you try to do that in some other countries, it's a risk, right? So I think also there's a lot of flux in what is, people's perception, what is an authoritarian behavior, a way of running things, right? Because even in China, it's not that it's monolithic that everybody doesn't like it. There's a lot of pride in China, right? There's a large segment in China that is pretty proud of China, that they're becoming powerful, that support a lot of those things. It's not just everybody is against the Chinese government and that's it. There's even within China, there's a lot of differences within, because it's such a gigantic country, right? It's not just that everybody, all the public thinks, oh yes, like they passed a law about, well, children should not play video games. I thought it was really funny. People should not play, you should not promote, celebrities should not promote themselves too much on social media. I thought, wow, it's an amazing law that you can pass that, right? And people stop. If you try to pass that in America, oh, there was, are you kidding? What are you talking about? What are you going to do to me? But there were a lot of people I saw when I was reading the newspaper say, yes, these influencers and celebrities are having too much of a negative effect on society, and they should not do it so much. I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So they agreed. So I don't know. I think I don't know exactly how it fits into that framework, because like I said at the beginning, the framework is developed in the West.
Yes.
All these frameworks are developed in the US mainly, but also in Europe, Australia, and so that's the mindset they use, right? And so I'm also limited. I'm sure there's lots of writing in Asia that I can't read, that I don't have access to those. Maybe there's a lot of thought about this, but I don't have access to it. I can't, people don't cross-disciplinarily read the things, I can't read Chinese journals, I can't read political, things about that. So one of the things I kind of am interested in is, in Taiwan specifically, because it's in this situation with China, and it positions itself against China, right? It positions itself as free, it almost deliberately goes, we're the small brand, so we're going to counter, in a marketing grade, we're going to counter against that one.
Also virtual signaling.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yes. Virtue signaling implies it's not true, kind of, but, so if it's true, it's not really signaling. It's not just signaling, right? And that's the thing about the companies you mentioned. Virtue signaling implies they don't really believe it. How do we know, right? Money clouds a lot of things, because when money is involved, people automatically believe you don't believe that. It's just for money. Yeah, but why? Just because you make money doesn't mean you can't believe in those things, right? You can still, you can choose to do those things while making money. There's no inherent objective reason why you can't, but there have actually been studies showing as soon as you introduce the idea of somebody's making money, suddenly all motives are suspect. Automatically. Because, oh, it's money. Right? My mother's like that. Oh, money is involved? Oh, then they don't care about you. Hospitals don't care because they get money. I'm like, well, who's going to pay for the hospital? She said, oh, I don't know. Okay. Well, they do care, but they also need money. So I guess in answer to your question, it's very difficult, I don't know the answer. And I'm trying to actually, so that's what I want to find out, right? Because almost all the studies are in the West, among Western consumers, Western companies, and it hasn't sort of moved over to say, okay, is it different? What is it different? Are conservatives really different in different countries, or their issues are different? I suspect it's more the issues are different rather than the mindset, because if you're conservative, you probably are risk averse no matter where you live, right? You probably value structure and order no matter where it is you live, right? Somebody came up with a clever way of predicting if you supported Trump or not. One of the US researchers said, rather than asking people, he came up with a very clever way, it was very predictive. He said, we're not going to ask you about whether you, or even politics. We're going to give you a parenting scale. And the scale was basically authoritarian parenting style. How do you raise your children? Are you more punishing? Are you more open, let them decide, or whatever, right? And he said it was very strongly correlated. The more authoritarian style of parenting you had, the more likely you were Trump supporter. And it was almost 80% predictive. It was much higher predictive than even asking them, are you a Trump supporter? Because a lot of people don't say they're Trump supporter. They think it's like, embarrassing. So they don't say, they won't say it in public that they are. But then with the measure, they said, oh, you can hide the measure by asking about parenting, and it comes out pretty well. Other questions? You look like you have more questions in common.
No, I just want to share something. From a psychology point of view, there was a study that the conservative versus liberal orientation has to do with the personality distribution that comes natural in the society. And that's why it is true that the social issue might be different in different countries, but the split between conservatism versus liberalism is always almost 50-50, but it swings around.
Right.
And that has to do with the born to have certain personalities.
Right, because it's a nature, it's your nature, it's not the party, which is right? Although it correlates very strongly because you self-select into the party, right? I believe these things, so this party matches, sort of, so I'll vote with them, right? Right, it's more of a personal character, outlook on life, sort of, in a right. Other comments, so it's not just him and me talking?
Yes.
Yes.
So you just mentioned authoritarianism, and you mentioned because before we use authoritarianism as a scale to measure parenting and maybe personality. So can we equate conservatism with authoritarianism? I mean, they both respect authority and social order, but somehow there are some difference. Right?
Well, yes. So there's a right-wing authoritarianism scale. It's a very well, the RWA scale is widely used. I don't like the way that scale is named because it already seems biased towards its negative. Like the person who came up with it is like, this is not good. Like it's automatically built into the scale. Like if I were taking that test, I would look at these and go, I'm not going to say this. No, I don't like this. But, so conservatism is not the same, but conservatives usually are more supportive of authoritarianism. And I guess in a practical sense, if you take it too far, right, if you take that to its extremes, then you end up with authoritarian government styles, right? But there's levels of it, right? Like being a parent as an authoritarian. I mean, sometimes you have to be authoritarian with them. They run around doing, you can't just say, do whatever, break that glass. It's fine. So there's degrees of it. And I think people only pay attention when it goes to the extreme. And they're like, oh, now you're an authoritarian government. Yes, but that's the extreme, right? It's a relative minority that are at the end of the scale on the liberal side as well. Most people tend to sort of in the middle, something like that. I personally have thought that when they ask, when you're reminded in the US, if you ask people like, as a Republican, what do you believe? If you ask it this way, if you trigger the idea in people's minds you're a liberal Republican, people tend to respond more in a hard way, like, oh, I cannot support that. But if you just ask it without doing that, what do you think about that? I found that people will respond in a more even way. But if they're reminded about their identity, like if it's made salient to them, they're like, oh, like they're almost like unconsciously reminded, oh, Republicans don't believe that. So no. But like it's almost a triggering, it almost pushes your or liberal, right? Whether it's Republican or Democrat or what. It almost pushes you, right? You remind your identity, right? Because it's taking over sort of your, oh, I have to be consistent with what I believe. But if you don't remind them, then people are not so hooked on it, Like I have some conservative, what would be considered Republican beliefs, even though I would never vote for, never personally. But like I'm in support of, so in the US, usually people who support capital punishment, like execution of some criminal, usually more conservative, although a lot of people don't support it. I do. And my friend said, oh, you're a Republican. I'm like, no, I'm not. I just think some people are really bad people and you should not have it. And so, oh, but it doesn't reduce the murder rate. I'm like, I know. It has nothing to do with reducing the murder rate. Not for, So, but that's traditionally considered more conservatives tend to support death penalty, yeah, capital, death penalty. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not. I don't, I have one belief that happens to be, but people are not so consistent all the time, right? They sort of have a mix of when they're not reminded about it. Do you want to see my other study? It's different. It's not this. So we're doing the opposite study. I won't go into it. We're doing the opposite study of leaders. So we're looking at the CEOs, and when they are conservative or liberal, how does it affect the outcome of their company? Do they make more money? Do they release more creative products? Et cetera, et cetera. That is an interesting one, because the problem there is the CEO of ASUS, is that how it's said? It's not ASUS, right? Everybody in America says it's ASUS. But the CEO of ASUS is not going to do my survey, right? I cannot make the CEO of ASUS come here and do my study. He said, no, I don't have time to do your nonsense. I'm the CEO of Procter & Gamble. I'm not going to do your study. So how do they do these studies? There have been studies looking at the political orientation of leaders, of companies, big companies. How do they do it? So in America, they have a very clever way of doing it. So in America, all the donations you make to politicians are public. Anything over $200 is public, and it's searchable. So there's data going back to 1971 to yesterday. It's updated every hour, actually. I thought, what? You can just search. You can search by people's names. You can search where they work. You can search the company they work for. You can search what address they live at. So for fun, I just decided to, who works in my college? Just University of Akron. I said, wow, whoa. And they tell you every single person they donated to, how much they donated to, the date they donated. So that's how they do these studies. They basically look up the CEO's name, and then they go back 10 years and say, okay, they have a formula about, who they donate to, and they say if you donate more to Republican candidates, you're conservative. If you donate more to liberal ones, you're liberal. No, that makes sense, right? Some try to be clever, and some try to donate to both equally, but most don't. So that's how they do those, and they say, okay, that's how we can tell, because you speak with your money, right? Because you're not going to donate to the party you don't believe in the value of it. So that's kind of how they do those. And they generally found that companies with conservative CEOs, they don't release as many innovative products. So their products are more traditional. They're good products, but they're not as new, right, or creative or innovative. But they also cheat on their taxes less. They don't try to hide money as much because they're less risk-taking. They don't want to take risk. So they're not willing to take the risk of being caught. So they actually are more, not law-abiding, but they pay their fair share of corporate tax. Whereas the liberal ones, they actually hide more of it, which is weird. Like Elon Musk, who pays, $5,000 in corporate tax, although he was worth like $200 billion. But, but legally, because they have ways of not doing it. So, and they found that conservative stock analysts are more accurate than liberal ones, because they don't take as much risk about, yes, we will predict these. They're more conservative about it, right? And so the stock market tends to even out. It's, people only pay attention to the extremes, but it's usually very steady, the stock market. And so they usually, over the long term, are more correct. Yeah, so it's kind of, so we're doing it in the context, is a weird context, and my friend wanted to do it, of data breach. Data breach, like when hackers steal data from companies. And so you think, what does it have to do with data breach? Because our theory is that if you're a conservative CEO or a senior leadership, because you're less willing to take risk, you will be more cautious about more cautious about using people's privacy and data and safeguarding it. It's not that liberal leaders are not concerned about it, they are. But they're willing to take risk. So they're like, it's easier not to, or oh, these firewalls and this technical thing. So we might not be as secure about it. Anyway, so we're doing that. So we'll see how that works. So we're taking the other angle. So we one on consumers, and now we're doing one on leaders, and so we're trying to do it from every angle to see how it works. So yeah, I won't show you the slide. Oh, time. She said like this, I thought 10 minutes? 8 minutes?
I'm just curious, is there any studies trying to study the size of the company and the market segmentation of the company?
For the leadership?
Right. Is it also related to whether they are going to make a public announcement
Oh.
You just mentioned that development company is so big it doesn't care. Okay, so perhaps bigger companies they are bold enough to make the announcement, right? Okay. But on the other hand, given the polarization, it might be easier to identify the potential customer of the company. So they may do some careful calculation and find that that kind of announcement may, increase the company's revenue. Is any study related to this?
So there hasn't been any study specifically saying, does the size of the company predict whether they will take a stance? Most of the studies look at big, large Fortune 5, like the big company. And also because the media usually covers the big companies when they take a stance, right? If the store in the corner takes a stance, the media tends not to, unless there's something interesting about it, they tend not to take a stance as much. But if Google takes makes it, they will cover that because Google is in so much of society, and Amazon, Walmart in the US, all these big. So I don't know what's a big company. If Asus takes a stance on something, if they came out in some social issue, people would cover that, right? The media would, because it's one of the biggest brands that Taiwan has, right? So they would cover that. So there's not been a study looking at which tends to take the stance, because it's kind of biased towards, they look at the large one, which kinds of larger companies will take the stance. And because big companies have more consumers, so it's more likely that consumers will demand that they articulate a position if they don't know what the position is. Some companies are very open though. Some what their stance is because they don't hide it. There's a company called Tom's in the US. It's not a huge, not gigantic, but it's a very social issue focused company, and they're open about it. They said, this is what we do. Every time you buy something from us, we're gonna donate it to social justice causes. You know that going in. If you don't want money to go to those causes, don't buy our product. So they're very open, and that's their business model. But that's a smaller. It's not as big of a. Right? So, but that's a different case from a typical company, right? Where, like I said at the beginning, usually companies, in the past they would not, right? They wouldn't. Why should we upset any customers? Just fly on our plane, buy our cereal. Why should we upset anybody? And it's a kind of selfish for the CEO to take a stance. Because you imagine if you have thousands of employees, many of them will not agree with your stance, right? Who are you to speak for the company, right? We do not believe. And you can see there's a lot of people at their desk going, who's we? I believe in this. But he or she speaks for the whole company. And so now this company believes it, but who is the company? It's people who work there. It's not only the leaders. But you're the leader, so you're associated with it, so you'll always speak on behalf of the company. All right? So it's tricky sometimes. I think sometimes what has happened is CEOs just don't think about it so much. Someone asks them, and so they just answer, and they're like, oh, wait, but then it's too late, because you've already said it. Are you in favor of gun control? Yes. I mean, but, and then sometimes they try to, yes, but, we value all customers, so they try to do this, but now consumers say, you cannot do this both sides business. Either take a stance, or if you don't take a stance, you're taking a stance. Silence is agreement. It's a bit unfair, but.
How can we distinguish between political orientation and social orientation? Because there are many issues like gun control, gay marriage, or abortion is kind of social and political both. So how can we, in research, how can we distinguish between the two?
Yeah, so I think they just label it political or as a convenient way of calling the measure. Political orientation is just measured directly, where they say, okay, you tell me, do you think you're liberal or conservative? And it's just they had to call the scale something, so they call it political orientation. Whereas the measure of abortion, gun, whatever social issue, yes, it's political, obviously, right? Because it differs by politics, but it's also political, but it's not inherently political, right? Your opinion on abortion doesn't have to have anything to do with your voting or your politics or your political ideology. It has become that in America. It's like the gun control issue. In another country, it's not relevant because you probably have everybody say the same thing, like we're against having guns. Okay, right? So the fact that it's controversial in one country but not controversial in another means that the social is not inherently a political issue by automatic, because of what it is, right? It's because of the culture and the unique situations of each country that made it political. Like the masks, for example. They're not inherently, there's nothing political about mask wearing, but it's become that. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question directly, there's not really a way to tell this is political, this is not. It's just, for this social issue that people have different opinions about, are the differences also matched by the political ideology? Because sometimes they're not, right? One of the issues that companies never have taken stances on in the US so far has been abortion. Because it is very, it's not only because it's very controversial, but because it's not clear what the correct stance to take is. Because it's one of those issues in the US that's very sensitive because nobody is actually pro-abortion. Not really. They're pro-choice, which is not the same thing, right? Because nobody likes the thing. But what position do you companies have, we're not getting involved in this. So far, there's a big abortion case going on in Texas now. They passed a weird law that you can sue people. That anyway, companies didn't say it. They were very quiet. All the big companies in Texas, both conservative and liberal, even the conservative ones who probably like this law, we're not getting involved in this. This is too controversial even for us. We're not. But something like social justice, racial equality, we know what the right thing is, fine. Environment, fine. Gun control, well, that also is very polarizing, but we're kind of safe saying we want to, regulate some gun, it's okay. But abortion is still that, it's one of the few issues left that companies have not been willing to get involved in, to give an opinion on when they have nothing to do with their business, right? When you sell shoes, you're like, we're not going to touch this yet. But I can see maybe, like people worry in the US that the Supreme Court will overturn their rule that women have a right to abortion if they want, right? That they have a right to it. If they overturn it, I can imagine some companies, especially the liberal companies, will get involved in saying something. Maybe. So, I don't know. Probably every country has that one or two issues where no corporation wants to say, we're not going to get involved in this because it will upset all our employees too much. And yeah, because abortion is one of those that crosses all kinds of lines. You don't have to be religious to be against it. You don't have to be conservative to be against it. You don't have to be liberal to be in favor of choice. It's a bit messier of an issue. It's not so clear what the separation is. So they tend not to get involved. But yeah, there's no real way to tell though, right? A social issue can become political very fast, or it just is not. It's unrelated. But those five are the classic American ones that tend to differ by political view. I'm getting all kinds of fingers.
So our time is up, so...
Well, I think we already 10 minutes past.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think people are really interested in this topic. So let's give a big pause to Gregorio.